Nate, we're back and we're talking about what we trade every single first round pick for today. Now, this does come with some disclaimers. We're not saying, hey, get these picks off your team right now. These picks are going to increase in value, but if you're dying to make some moves you should be looking to make over the course of the offseason or when we get to draft day, just some concepts we're looking at. And one of the reasons we want to do this so much, one of the big caveats here that I wrote down because I thought about it and it's very powerful to me. And one of the reasons why we love implementing trading out into your tool belt is because you are not restricted by what you can add to your team because of the values that are dictated by the draft board. You're not locked into drafting X position because it's the best value, the best player, whatever it is. And I know there's a caveat of drafting best player available no matter what. And I can get down with that. I get it, because then the concept is you add them to your team, you trade them later for need as you need to. But if we can cut out the middleman, get the same value, why not? Work efficiently and whatnot. But with all that said, before we get into it, be sure you're liking the video, commenting down below what you're looking to trade some of your first round picks for this offseason. If you're holding on tight, hey, can't blame you there, but we want to hear all about it either which way. And we want to hear all about it in our Patreon Discord, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get in there for that 7-day free trial. Check out the beautifully organized Discord with all the categories you could possibly want, from the NFL draft, college, regular season hub, trade advice, you name it. It's all there. But with that said, Nate, I'm kicking it to you. Let's get to the content that people came for. Kicking it your way to start off with the 101. If you're trading this pick, what are you looking to get?
Yeah, the 101 we know is always valuable every offseason. Everyone wants the 101. You get the power of choosing whoever you want, whoever you think is the best player. You get the choice. You don't have to worry about who's falling to you. You get to make the decision at the top of the draft. So the 101, we know it has a lot of value. One of the more valuable assets in Dynasty Fantasy Football on a yearly basis. And can I turn that into a true top asset that I know is already a top asset in Dynasty Fantasy Football? And what I mean by that is, can I turn the 101 into a top quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, or Lamar Jackson? And I understand I'm going to have to add something to this to make that happen. Once we get near draft time, the 101, it continues to gain value. The Caleb Williams hype might be out of control. It might be somebody else, who knows. But look, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, those guys, they're the top of the class. And the 101, if I can add a second to it, an early second maybe, if I need to add a 25 first, honestly, to lock in one of those players, I am willing to do it. Especially if I think that 25 first is late. If it's early or mid, I'm going to be hesitant to make that move. I'd much rather just keep the 101 at that point. But to just lock in the fact that I have one of the top quarterbacks moving forward in the NFL in Dynasty Fantasy Football. Look, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, they might get there. But if I can spend just a late 25 first or second round pick to guarantee that and just lock it in right now and have the production from week one, I'm going to make that move. And I think this is where, we all love having the homegrown players on our roster.
Yeah, we
do. If I can pay a second round pick to lock in the player that I want my homegrown player to become, like, if you already have a pretty good team, that just makes sense to lock it in, play it safe, know what you're getting, and move forward with your team being better.
I think one of the concepts we're going to touch on throughout this video is just what you highlighted there, which is the concept of getting the proven talent, the proven commodity over rookie draft picks. And that's not to say that there isn't a time and place for drafting rookie draft or rookie picks. Go back and check out a video I did this last week about, how to actually use your first round picks and, where you should kind of go with them in different situations. But if I'm moving off of 101, and one thing you have to do when you have 101, did you earn that 101? Was your team so bad that you were gifted, quote unquote, the 101? Then you have to decide, what does your team look like? What's your team makeup? Did you just have a bunch of injuries, players who are still developing, whatever the case is, or is your team just god awful and you don't have a lot of draft capital to work with? What I'm looking to do in that case, or with any 101 I'm looking to move off of, I'm looking to either get a bunch of draft capital, the biggest draft capital package I can find, or variety, whatever you want to call it. Because if I earn that 101, my team is probably in bad shape. There's a good chance of that. Or even if I'm, in bad shape, but maybe I have some pieces, I'm looking to get a stud, like you mentioned, like the Mahomes, Lamar, Allen, whatever it is, throw something on top of the 101 to get those guys. Or there might be players that you can straight up swap this 101 for. And I'm not saying you can do this guaranteed, but I think somebody who's really being valued low right now is Justin Herbert. And saw a startup draft this week where Caleb Williams went 106. They were drafting derby pick style or whatever, where you draft the rookie picks. The 101 went 106 in the Dynasty startup draft. So de facto, probably Caleb Williams more than likely, maybe something else if he maybe watches this video and decides to trade out of it. Who knows? But Justin Herbert, just a piece that a lot of people, and I get the concerns that, has dealt with injuries, has had, struggles here and there, inconsistencies, this and that, and a lot of concerns with how the team overall has performed. The one thing we have to take into consideration, we got a new coach coming in, might have already come out and been announced by the time this video releases. We have no offensive coordinator coming in, might have also been released by the time of this video. And we have a new GM coming in too. They kicked their GM to the curb this offseason. So we got a whole new, somewhat of a front office system coming in. We have a new offense coming in, a top 10 draft pick coming in as well to hopefully add another reliable weapon or maybe offensive line help at worst, whatever the case is. And then, pivoting off of Herbert, if I want to go for that draft pick package plus a player, something like Kyle Pitts plus a random 25 first plus a random 26 first, ideally in a perfect world, those are early. I'm not going to say that they are, but if they're mid, super happy. A late, I'm probably looking for a little bit more on top, but this gives you 3 assets that last a really long time, that are going to last through the next. You got something for now, something for next year, something for the following year. Love to do that with my draft picks or whenever I'm getting a large bundle back. And the nice thing too is this is keeping some points off your roster to help continue to tank your pick for the next year. So you could hopefully do this again and continue piling on your draft picks and not trading your 101 before it's the 101, something we've discussed as a mistake in the past. But at 101, that's what I'm looking to do. Get that stud or get a big old package of draft capital. But you really need to evaluate where you are as a team, because with all of these picks, that kind of dictates which way you should be headed. At the end of the day, we're looking at the 102 now, which is by most people's standards, Marvin Harrison Jr. I think we can say consensus at that point. A certain recent Superflex mock draft might say otherwise, but check that out if you haven't yet. That might be kicking around on the channel. I know it is, actually. I posted it and everything, and edited it, so it's there. We were both there when it happened, but we're talking the 102 now. And consensus Marvin Harrison Jr., what are you looking to do at the 102? We got similar trajectories with our picks here, but I like where we're both at. What do you got here?
Yeah, I think we're kind of both in the same mindset of, hey, the 102 is probably Marvin Harrison Jr. It could be Drake May in a Superflex draft, Jaden Daniels. I think all those guys are candidates here. But if I'm moving out of the 102, I don't want to miss out on a top wide receiver, because, if I number one, I don't want to miss out on Marvin Harrison Jr. because I think he's a stud. I think he's the closest thing we have to a guarantee to become a top dynasty wide receiver. But if I'm going to move off of him, I think I can move off of him for value to get what I already think is a top dynasty wide receiver, and have seen it in the league as well. And I think I can get Puka Nacua plus, because even though Puka Nacua had literally like one of the best rookie seasons ever, the hype around Marvin Harrison Jr. and, like I said, the near guarantee of his success because of his his talents and skill set as a generational prospect outweigh Puka Nacua and him being a day 3 pick. And we're going to take advantage of that maybe. So I can trade the 102 from Puka Nacua plus, most likely. The hype is that much, especially because the 102 comes with choice. It doesn't have to be Marvin Harrison Jr. They can pick up Drake May or Jaden Daniels. And that choice allows them not to have to worry about straight up, hey, would I rather have Puka Nacua or Marvin Harrison Jr.? It's would I have the choice of Marvin Harrison Jr. or a quarterback, or trading away this asset, or Puka Nacua, and maybe a second round pick on top of that. And if I can make that happen, I think I'm making a lateral move with the wide receiver. I'm getting someone I already know is going to be able to get me points. I've already seen it in the NFL, the success. And I'm getting a second round pick on top, whether that's in this year's draft or it's in next year's draft. I would be happy with either way, because I think the second round picks this year and next year are going to be pretty valuable. We've seen second round picks turn into a lot of really good players.
This is a move I think that just gets snap accepted. You send this and you might be able to get more out of it, to be honest. But I love where this is at. I love the concept. I went with a similar one. I don't get a plus on top, and you might be reaching with this one too. You might have to add to the 102 to get this done, and whatever that add ends up being, I might just stick with whatever I'm getting at the pick. But I'm going after Amon-Ra St. Brown. And this is because this is somebody who still to this day just doesn't feel like he's getting the respect he deserves for what he does in the dynasty spectrum or the fantasy football spectrum. Because you look at his production and what he's doing compared to everybody else. I want to say he was a top 5 finisher this year and finished pretty dang well last season, despite having a couple banged up games. Just a top PPR producer. But from day one, and we've touched on this already, whether it's right or not, Marvin Harrison Jr. will have a top 5 dynasty label on him at the wide receiver position. Amon-Ra St. Brown's already there, and he's already producing like that. And I think when you can kind of quote unquote shortcut that process, something we see similar with like Garrett Wilson, who has a top 8 or so label on him and was, regarded very highly coming into drafts, maybe not as a top 5 guy, but still to this day has kind of wavered in his value because he hasn't lived up to the production expectation that we've wanted to see from him. And I think if Marvin Harrison Jr. comes in and sees that top 5 label, we don't see it right away for whatever reason. Wide receivers take time to adjust. I think he's a great player. I'm not saying he's going to take time or anything like that, but it does take time sometimes for wide receivers to gel to the league. We see it at different rates for different players, and some players, they hit the ground running and they're good to go. And then some players take some time and they're better than the players who hit the ground running and were good to go from day one. We see a lot of fluctuations there. I'm just saying that if he does take time, you're going to see his value waver. Somebody whose value who isn't going anywhere right now, in my opinion, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and still somebody who is a top wideout who doesn't get treated as such, at least in the value spectrum and the respect spectrum of things. So that's who I'd be looking to get. Again, if I have to add something on top of the 102, I'm not opposed to necessarily doing it. I can't get enough Amon-Ra St. Brown on my teams. Who are you looking to get at the 103? I love this get, and I still think you might be buying low on this player, to be totally honest. So go ahead, get into this one. I love this pick.
Yeah, look, Bob, if you have the 103, and you're trying to trade it away, you probably don't need a quarterback, because if you need a quarterback, you're best just sitting there at the 103 and probably taking Drake May or Jaden Daniels, or trading for a quarterback with the 103. But you know what this draft class doesn't have? A top talent at the running back position. And we can use this draft capital to still acquire a top talent at the running back position. Just because you have the 103 and there's not a prospect on the board at the 103 does not mean you can't go get a running back for your team. You still can. And I think we can go after Breece Hall, Bob. And I think with the 103, especially over the coming months as these draft picks grow in value, I think we can get Breece Hall plus with the 103, especially when you have Marvin Harrison's Jr.'s name sitting on the board there, especially when you have the top quarterback sitting around there. People are going to get excited. Breece Hall, he's not only a top talent and dynasty asset, but just the running back scarcity, the landscape right now with so little top talent, I think just makes him that much more valuable. Can I go get Breece Hall and in a second round pick? I think I can with the 103. I might be able to even get slightly more on that as we get closer to the draft day. But moving the 103 to get a top running back that's going to give me production right away, going to give me long-term dynasty value at the running back position, which is rare. We only have a couple players we can really say about that for the next 2-3 years. Breece Hall is an absolute stud, and I honestly think that getting him for the 103 is a great value.
I'm with you 1,000%. Love this buy, love this pick. And like I said, I still think you're possibly buying low because he did well in his first season back from the ACL. And we don't see that a lot. That's something I've, pounded the drum for all offseason, was like, hey, be careful with Breece Hall, because I was expecting him to have a down year and you'd be able to buy him lower after, but I think he kind of, shortcutted the process again. And I still think he's probably a little undervalued. I think he's probably a top 5 running back to most people, but I think with the way running back is going in Dynasty, that people are going to start devaluing these guys more. They're going to slide down overall rankings that much more, because running backs, we see it every year that there's these pop-offs that come out of quote-unquote nowhere. The Ty Chandler, for example, Jaylen Warren was solid for quite a few weeks. Isaiah Pacheco's, Kyron Williams, who may be discussed later. We're seeing this more and more, and just because there's so much good talent in the running back pool that teams can draft them later. They don't get excited about them, or we don't get excited about them as a community until they're popping off. And I think you're going to be able to supplement, and people are going to be able to realize that more and more over time, is that they can kind of build zero RB. I still want at least one good one, I think this is a good value to go get a great one.
Like I said before we recorded here, Bob, if you don't have a top running back, you don't have any running backs.
Yeah. Yeah. I still believe in that 100%. With this pick, I'm looking to go get one of my favorite wide receivers, and I'm somewhat concerned with this offense going forward because there's a lot of limbo to be had and a lot of cap situations to figure out, and I don't know how they're going to do it, but I'm looking to go get Chris Olave with this pick, and I think you can get a second round pick on top of it because it's possible that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be on the board here. I don't know if somebody went quarterback or not. I still like the concept of going Chris Olave, getting an additional pick. I don't think they're that far apart, and that's not saying I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is bad. I think Chris Olave is that damn good. So I noted the hesitancy somewhat with the Saints situation, but still a young enough player, still a great player to have, and still thrived in some situations or sometimes while in less than ideal circumstances over the course of 2023. And if you're set at quarterback, maybe there's one kicker on the board here, but again, we don't want to be restricted to what the board has to offer, and we don't want to reach down the board and lose value that way. So if you're set at quarterback and looking for another way to improve your roster, you can almost never have enough wide receivers. There may be discussions for going Neighbors here. I love me some Malik Neighbors. So there's some discussion there. I would think about leaning that way in all honesty. I'm stupid high on Malik Neighbors, but I've come full circle. Not that I really wasn't ever just concerned, but
I think the Neighbors pick is definitely a consideration here, and because of that, I think you should be able to get more than a second round pick on top of Chris.
You think an additional second as
like
well?
2 seconds? I think you should be able to get 2 seconds or like a late 25 first even.
Okay. Instead of the second?
Yeah, instead of the second.
Okay. Yeah.
Either 2 seconds or late first.
Those options.
I think you can push for that with the 103 because Marvin Harrison Jr. might be around. People will prefer Malik Neighbors over Chris Olave.
So you heard it here first. Start with a 25 first. Go from there, work your way down. And then try to snag a couple seconds on the back end instead. It's nothing, not bad to do. And the one thing with all these trades, we never, none of these trades are super definitive. You kind of got to feel out your league. And sometimes it's a little more than what we think is fair value for us. Every league valuations are different. Your trade values are subjected to the league dynamic. So
also these picks will gain value over the coming months. So if you can't make the trade now, you might be able to make the trade in 2 months.
That's true. And these are all players so far. We haven't listed any old guys by any stretch. These are all players that, you're getting young, good players for draft capital. Yep. And that's almost never a way to go wrong. So let's talk about the 104. I quote unquote sniped you with this one, but I like that we were still in lockstep a little bit. What do you got here at the 104? Another guy who I think is somewhat of a value, but maybe there's concerns. Maybe we should be a little more concerned with this player than we are. Maybe you can convince me otherwise. But who do you got? Who are you targeting with this 104?
Yeah, I'm trying to buy low while the hype has died down on Trevor Lawrence. And I don't think that this season has been that indicative of Trevor Lawrence not being a good quarterback. Honestly, the offense wasn't that great. The team itself wasn't that great. They lost a lot of games they should have won. Trevor Lawrence kept them in a lot of games they really shouldn't have been in. And he had some turnover issues for sure. But we've seen that with many good quarterbacks here recently, as defenses are changing how they play in the NFL right now, and quarterbacks are having to adjust to the cover 2 base defense and all these different things. But Trevor Lawrence, still one of the top generational prospects to come out of college at the quarterback position. He has been very good. Honestly, you take a step back, you get some scope, big picture, you look at his stats. He's been a good quarterback, and he's going to be someone that is going to be the quarterback of the Jaguars for many years to come. There's not any situation anytime soon where the Jaguars are moving on from Trevor Lawrence. They're going to continue to build around him. I fully do not expect them to re-sign Calvin Ridley because it's going to cost them a second-round pick to do so. But they can use either that second-round pick they would have ended up having to send over to the Falcons for Calvin Ridley for a wide receiver this year. They could use a first-round pick on a wide receiver. They are going to build around Trevor Lawrence. They're going to get him some more talent. He can't go out there with just Christian Kirk as his wide receiver 1. So there's going to be some additions coming in, whether it's for free agency or the draft. Right now, going into 2024, they have $17.5 million in cap space. They definitely have some ways they can open up some more cap space. So they're going to be able to play around in free agency a little bit. And like I said, they got the draft capital to surround Trevor Lawrence with. So I'm trying to buy back into Trevor Lawrence while everyone's kind of down on him. I have great feelings for him long term being a top 12 quarterback. He might not have that top 5 upside, but I don't have any concerns about him not being a relevant quarterback, not being a top 12, top 15 quarterback on a seasonal basis. Give me Trevor Lawrence and a 25 first on top of it. Right now with the 104, I think I can get that because of how low people are on Trevor Lawrence. People want to step away from Trevor Lawrence. Look, he had that bad year with Urban Meyer, but who didn't have a bad year with Urban Meyer that year? And the growing pains as the Jaguars continue to try to become a better team. Remember, they were a fringe playoff team this year. Trevor Lawrence is going to continue to have weapons built around him, kind of like what the Packers did for Jordan Love, hopefully.
I like this deal a good bit. I like the targeting of going after somebody who the community has fallen a little to the wayside. We see it in our Discord. We see the questions, comments, concerns, complaints, whatever it may be. Is it time to sell out? And I think, especially this deal is especially appealing to me or makes sense to me if a quarterback is still on the board at 104, because because then you're not, especially in Superflex, which this is all based off of. If you're in Superflex, it's a hard pill to swallow when you're trading away a quarterback without getting one in return, or at least equaling out your quarterback chances. This would guarantee that, and if they're trading to that pick, they're probably going quarterback either way. Yeah. So I like this move a lot. I don't know if you get the first, but I think you can start there, like we said before, work your way down to a couple seconds, a second and a third at worst, I think is where you end up. But I like this deal. I like the mindset, and I like buying low. Somebody who I love buying low in on, I still don't think there's enough respect on Jordan Love, and that's coming from a super biased, quote-unquote, Packer fan. Nobody gets more frustrated with this team than I have. If you want to check out how frustrated I was with the Packers draft this year, head over to patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. There's a video of me losing my mind when they drafted a certain player in the third round, and not in a good way. But so I want to go get Jordan Love. And there's a good chance, as I kind of touched on, that there's a quarterback on the board here, but maybe you're not sold on the quarterback that's falling to you. Maybe somebody else really wants to get in on this pick. They want to get out on Love while he's hot, whatever the case is. But I've seen enough with Jordan Love. He struggled somewhat. Kind of came out of the gates hot against Chicago, and then kind of slowed down throughout the season, struggled for a good month and a half, and then really came on, turned it on over the course of the offseason, or the course of the latter half of the season, to make the playoffs. Awesome. First year as a starter. I know he's been in the league for a few years. To me, that doesn't matter too much. Was great in his playoff debut. Would have had a perfect passer rating if not for them deciding to throw on 3rd and 7 late in the game to try to, ice the game, whatever the case may be. It is what it is. I digress. I still think there's room to add Jordan Love. And I think with because I feel like most circles, Jordan Love is still a fringe quarterback one value-wise for most people. And if you have him, I think you're really happy to have him for the most part. I think there's plenty of people out there that are still, the people that are just constantly looking to ship off for the next best thing. When they get a little cold feet about a player. But Jordan Love, definitely somebody I want to target with this pick as well. And again, not be restricted to the quarterbacks that are on the board or anything else that may be on the board. So speaking of it not being restricted to what's on the board, like this pick a lot with your next one too, Nate. Good spot, good targeting as well. What do you got at the 105?
Yeah, at the 105, once again, going back to the running back position, hey, if I can't pick one up in the draft, how can I use my draft capital to go acquire one? I want to go buy low, quote unquote, on Jonathan Taylor, who is an aging running back, they're going to tell me, but he's already got that second contract and he's staying on the Colts. So I am so excited that he is staying on the Colts. We have seen this where if a running back hits free agency, everything gets thrown out the window and everything is a new situation. It's unknown. We saw it with Miles Sanders this year. You can be a good running back. As soon as you hit free agency, go to another team, anything can happen. But if you have a team that drafted you, has committed to you with a long-term extension, and we've seen the Colts, they are more than happy to ride Jonathan Taylor as their offense. Even with Anthony Richardson coming back, they're still going to give him plenty of touches as they continue to develop AR. So Jonathan Taylor is someone I'm trying to go acquire as a top 5 running back. And think I can get some draft capital on top of this too with the 105, as we're looking at probably the Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, Brock Bowers here, some big names, some stud young players. So people are going to be looking to move off a quote unquote aging running back like Jonathan Taylor, who I still think has plenty of significant dynasty value over the next 2 to 3 years, which is what that window that we're always looking for, especially at the running back position. If I can guarantee, good volume and consistent production of the running back position for 2 to 3 years, that is something I can build my team around for my competitive window. So 105 for Jonathan Taylor, a 25 second on top, I think I could probably get. Let's go with that. Let me get that top running back, move off the 105, get the production right now.
I went 2 other positions. I went with an either or here. But I will say, as a disclaimer, if Malik Neighbors is kicking around, I cannot advise trading out because I don't think I would. But if he isn't, you have some flexibility with where you can go positionally. That's why I went with 2 options. And that's one of the things with trading out. You can target any position, anytime, any other sorts of assets you want. You can go any direction. That's why we love doing it. That's why we love talking about it. But I'm looking to go at Kyler Murray here. Again, if a quarterback is here, I'm not sold on. I do like Kyler Murray. I think they bring in more weapons this offseason for him. I don't think Marquise Brown is a wide receiver 1 for them. I think Michael Wilson is a nice piece. I'm not sold on him being a 1 in that offense. Who knows? It could happen. Stranger things have happened, but maybe. I don't know if that's the case or not. But
Bob, I would go after Kyler Murray before the draft.
Sure.
If we're going after Kyler Murray, I think the time to buy him is before the NFL draft, because I think it's almost a guarantee that they go after wide receiver with their first round pick. And if not with the first round pick, then with a later pick to build around Kyler Murray. Because like you said, Marquise Brown, we like him, but he's not the wide receiver 1 there. I think Michael Wilson's a great wide receiver 3 for that team, but going and getting Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Roman Dunze, giving them that wide receiver 1 for their franchise quarterback they've committed long-term money to, that's going to raise his value up. So the buy window for Kyler Murray is before the draft, before all those mock drafts start coming out showing Marvin Harrison Jr. through the Cardinals. They're already starting to come out, so your buy window is closing.
Yeah, 100%. And if you can't get in on Kyler Murray, another wide receiver I like to go get, maybe Malik Neighbors is gone. Maybe you can't get that quarterback deal you want. Maybe you don't need a quarterback. Maybe you're sitting flush at quarterback already. You maybe aren't a fan of Roma Dunze, whatever the case is. Or you want to pass on Brock Bowers. Who knows? A wide receiver I love and I think could be heading to a better situation this season, maybe less complicated, less crowded, I guess you could say, Brandon Ayuk. And I think the nice thing about this pick, I think you get a nice piece on top. I think you could chase a 25 second with this pick on top of Brandon Ayuk. I know a lot of people are kind of fluky with Brandon Ayuk, where they stand on him, even though he had a pretty phenomenal season, cooled off over stretches of it. But again, that's the crowdedness of the offense. They have a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of pieces, a lot of offensive talent that they can get the ball to on any given play. Brandon Ayuk was still a fixture in this offense, was still a heavily utilized piece in this offense. And I think anywhere he goes, he's turned into an incredible, skilled wide receiver. And I definitely am happy to get a piece of him. Cost of the 105, like I said, I think you can chase a 25 second on top of Brandon Ayuk with this pick. Especially, he's another one too that you probably want to move on a little quicker before his situation gets sorted. I think he finds a new team before long. They either trade him over the course of next season or they trade him this season, whatever the case is. I think he's finding a new home at some point because it doesn't sound like they're in the realm to pay him at this point. So those are 2 ways I'm going, 2 ways I'm thinking about with this pick. Anything else to add to your name?
No, I think it's good. I think Brandon Ayuk is the guy I definitely want to be targeting. And I do think with the 105, because I was actually considering Brandon Ayuk here as the 105 as well, because I was thinking, would I rather have Malik Neighbors? Would I have Brandon Ayuk? I actually think Malik Neighbors actually compares pretty well to Brandon Ayuk. But with the current situation, I'm going to kind of lean Neighbors. So I think I can get Brandon Ayuk here and plus. I think they're in the same tier. They are in the same tier for me. So, whichever one I can get plus is where I'm leaning.
Yeah, that's always a good stretch. If you got 2 guys in the same spot, we say it in our Discord all the time. There's 2 players that are similar value. It's like, well, which one can you get plus on top of? Because that's where I'm going. And especially when you're dealing with the same position. That's one thing we harp on. One of the strategies I've focused on for a long time is if you're dealing a 1-for-1 at the same position, never send it straight up, because whoever's sending that deal is just saying, hey, I would rather have this player. Would you rather have this player that I don't no longer want because I want that player instead? always add that third piece in, or maybe four pieces. Maybe you're doing a pick flip, whatever the case is, if they're really close. Send a third to get a second back, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Even if you, in your mind, believe that I would rather have this player, it kind of puts you in a position of leverage where you're saying, well, to me, and in, if you have dynasty rankings to back you up, or of any kind, or whatever, crowdsourcing, whatever you want to throw in there, hey, this player is over that player. You need to compensate me for trading you a quote unquote better player, even if you believe that they might not be. That's one thing to always keep in mind when you're trading. A little fun tidbit to get off track. But before we get too far off track, let's get back on it. Talking the 106, Nate, it's about time we talk about some tight ends, and I think there's a good reason why. Why don't we talk about it, Nate?
Yeah, I think this is the part of the draft where Brock Bowers probably comes off the board in most drafts. And when you're looking at Brock Bowers on the board, obviously people are going to be very excited to draft Brock Bowers, to get the next best thing at the tight end position. And what can we do to take advantage of that? And maybe just pivot to a different tight end, and just kind of skip the growing pains that we might have with Brock Bowers. Who knows? We saw it a little bit with Dalton Kincaid this year, some growing pains. Sam Laporta, of course, took off right away. But can I move this 106 for Mark Andrews and a player like Christian Kirk? Can I get two assets that I can put into my starting lineup? I still get a top tight end. I get Mark Andrews, who's going to give me top tight end production right away. He's only 28 and a half years old, so he's still got, another 3-4 years of top production, I think, no problem. Obviously, Brock Bowers is going to be more valuable than Mark Andrews when he's sitting there on the board, getting the next best thing. That's what people want. So can I get a guy like Christian Kirk? Can I get a wide receiver that I can put into my flex spot, put in my wide receiver 3 spot possibly, and continue to make my team better? Because that's what we want to do here with the 106. Obviously, Brock Bowers makes my team better, but if I can turn that into 2 players that I feel really good about putting in my starting lineup, then that makes my team even that much better. So, how can we use this pick to maybe diversify and still pick up a really good tight end for our team that we might need?
Yeah, I love Brock Bowers as much as the next guy. And I think that's, why we're talking tight end so much at this position. I am as well, is because, Brock Bowers is this next generational prospect. And I'm not going to say he's not. That we've highlighted the production that he's had. Tight ends don't produce like this in college. They rarely get over like 600 yards. He's gotten almost 800 yards. He's gotten 800 yards in his first 2 seasons, almost 800 yards this last season as well. Dealt with injury. That's really the
He had
only reason he
surgery
didn't
this
get it.
season, and he came
Yeah,
back.
came back and almost still crossed 800-yard threshold. I mean, Brock Bowers is a great talent, but in the theme of the video and just in general, why not target somebody who's already done what you want Brock Bowers to be? Brock Bowers is only going to go so far. Does he end up being a Travis Kelce type producer? With everything even still behind him, I'd call the odds pretty slim, because he needs to be in the right offense with the right quarterback, right system, right targeting, right target share in front of him to do all these things. So I think you're looking at a pretty low percentage, even though he's very good. Does that mean he can't be a top 5 guy? Absolutely not. But if I could pivot off of the pick that I'm using to draft Brock Bowers, whether it's 105, 6, 7, whatever it ends up being, whenever he's on the board, I'm looking to go get Sam Laporta or one of these other top tight ends, or Trey McBride plus, I think, is another good pivot to go to, even with the speculation of Marvin Harrison Jr. being drafted there, whatever the case is. I think that going and grabbing one of these proven assets that have already, kind of done what you want a Brock Bowers to do, and just anytime you can go trade for a player who's already done what you want somebody to become, why take that out of your tool belt? Why not, at worst, explore the option? Because I know not everybody's going to want to trade Sam Laporta for Brock Bowers. A lot of people are going to be in the camp that say, no, why would I put the risk on myself going after a younger player who maybe at some point produces more than Sam Laporta? Sam Laporta's already done it. Why make that pivot? But I know there's going to be players out there that get big eyes when they see Brock Bowers ticking on the board, and they're like, I'll do anything to get him. And if you're not getting, a top tight end in return, you can chase other positions too, for sure. And like I said, I think Trey McBride plus is another good pivot, probably a second-ish, maybe you get a bit more out of that. I don't know if you quite get a first on top, but I think you get somewhere in that category. And to quick touch on yours with Mark Andrews, judging by YouTube comments, judging by everything I've seen with Mark Andrews' value fluctuating on Keep Your Cut, anywhere else, not positive for Mark Andrews right now. If he makes a comeback in the playoffs, that'll help his value tick up. So your buy low window might be closing on him a little bit, because God knows if there's ever a season-ending injury, whatever it is, too often it's like, oh, especially when he's old, quote unquote, like Mark Andrews is, dead. That's the way the value trends when that happens. So your window might be closing on him, but I like the concept of going after him as well, because I too think he's got plenty of time. There is the notion, and you might be able to touch on this more than I can, but I do know that the Ravens are in somewhat of a cap strain the next season. I think they're one of the lower cap teams, and I think Mark Andrews is actually a pretty favorable cut for them. They have Isaiah Likely now. Not saying it happens. I know that is fueled to the fire of what's happening with Mark Andrews, but in my opinion, Mark Andrews isn't any less good because he's on a different team. Now, is he as featured? That's the question. But I think he's still a dang good tight end. Can he stay healthy? Can he, continue on throughout his career? Who knows? But I still like this value, especially getting that plus on top that you get to kind of insure yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
I like it a good bit.
Yep. I don't think Mark Andrews is going anywhere.
I tend to agree, but you never know, Nate. It's scary playing Dynasty Fantasy Football.
It can be. It can be scary sometimes.
But you can definitely key in on that. And like I said, Mark Andrews isn't retiring. I don't think that's on the table. So either way, he's going to be a value somewhere, more than likely. I don't think anybody adds him with just the intent to, hey, go block, I guess. I don't think that's on the cards for Mark Andrews anytime soon. But let's talk about the 107 before we get into a quote unquote rapid fire final 5 picks of the last round, just to help speed things up. And we're getting out of the top tier of what we believe is the quote unquote locked in. We say quote unquote a lot, but the quote unquote top 7 locked in talent that we believe at the top of the board. And then we're going to rally through the last 5. What do you got at 107 though, before we get to that point?
Yeah, at the 107, this is probably where Rome Odunze is going off the board in a lot of mock drafts right now. So that last of the top 3 wide receivers. So once again, I'm looking at, hey, can I go get a different wide receiver? Maybe I feel more confident in. Maybe I'm just getting a similar wide receiver, but I'm getting the wide receiver I'm hoping Rome Odunze becomes, or something like that. So looking at the board and value-wise, what I can get with the 107, I ended up falling onto Devonta Smith as my target with the 107. This is a mid-first round pick, but since it's still in that top 7 tier, we can get some pretty good value for it. And I think Rome Odunze can absolutely become a top 12 wide receiver in this league. I'm a big Rome Odunze fan myself, but we've already seen with Devonta Smith. Devonta Smith has been a top 12 wide receiver in this league. He is a wide receiver who's been consistent over his first 3 years. And we know that Devonta Smith is truly one of the best wide receivers in the league, just from a pure talent standpoint and ability and technique standpoint. And he's someone that's going to be kicking around for quite a while. And I think the Eagles are really, really happy to have him. And if he's not with the Eagles long-term, whatever team gets him is going to be extremely happy to have him. And I think he's someone that can be both a really good wide receiver 2 and also a pretty good wide receiver 1 as well, depending on the team situation. I get the player I'm hoping Rome Odunze becomes, honestly, with Devonta Smith here. Maybe there's a little bit more upside with Rome Odunze if he can become the true wide receiver 1 for a team, and that's his situation. But Devonta Smith's fantasy points are pretty much the same as any other wide receiver 1 on any other team with how the Eagles offense has looked the past 2 years. And even with their kind of struggling this year, he was still a top 24 wide receiver. So Devonta Smith, someone, if I'm looking to move off the 107, someone I'm looking to target.
I do think, like you touched on, I think there is some more possible upside with Rome Odunze that you're quote unquote missing out on. And maybe that gets you a pick kicked back to you, a third, something to just put a little sprinkle on that upside that might be there with the right person. Who knows? Rome Odunze fan. You never know.
But I don't even know if there really is that much more upside with Rome Odunze. And not anything against Rome Odunze, but Devonta Smith is just honestly that good.
Right. With the quality of play, it's even if he's a wide receiver, even if Odunze is a wide receiver 1 on a team, we always say, like, if you're going to put somebody into wide receiver 1 territory, who are you taking out? And I think that's a tough discussion with Odunze, as much as we all like him here. I think it's a tough discussion to have, and you have a good point. With Devonta Smith, you get a known commodity again. And I'm going after another known commodity and somebody who I still think we can buy low on in Jalen Waddle. We've talked about it a little bit over the course of the latter half of the season, just a real down year, between being banged up. If he wasn't missing games, he was missing in games. If he wasn't missing with an inactive label before the game, he had like an eye issue at one point, had a foot issue at, just everything under the sun. Really strange year for Jalen Waddle. I think that too much is being looked into it, and that played into Tyreek Hill's great year because he's the only guy out there that's really a reputable wide receiver at that point. They don't have a tight end option, and that's not to say that Tyreek Hill is any less good than he is, because he's a phenomenal player. But I think that Jalen Waddle, after we saw 2 really good seasons from Jalen Waddle, we see a bounce back of a clean bill of health, whatever the case is. He gets back into it. And I think too, with Waddle, offers a little bit more long-term upside, because we know that Tyreek Hill has said that, 2025 is my last year, still a good bit out, which is fine. I think Waddle can be somebody who is a wide receiver 1 on a team, or at least could be a 1A, 1B, which I think he's close to already. But, and obviously with just not saying that Devonta Smith doesn't have upside, but we know Waddle, any play can be a 75-yard touchdown. And more frequently than Devonta Smith. And I'm not trying to bash either player here, but you get what I'm saying. Had a bad year. Given the wide receiver talent that's possibly left on the board here with Rome Odunze, who knows, maybe Malik Neighbors gets the worst spot in the NFL draft and is still sitting here, or maybe Brock Bowers. I wouldn't be surprised to see managers bite on this deal to re-roll on Jalen Waddle after what was a down year for sure. Everybody who looks at it can see, hey, this year sucked. Didn't miss a ton of games outright. But, I can't count how many times I got, Jalen Waddle in the medical tent. Jalen Waddle has left play. Jalen Waddle questionable to return. Super frustrating when I have him everywhere. But if I can, and I'm sitting at the 107, I'm looking to add one more share, give another run, and see if I can, like I said, buy low-ish on Jalen Waddle.
I think you can buy low on Jalen Waddle. I think you can actually probably get something on top. With the 107. I don't think it's gonna be a lot, but I think you can get something on top right now with how Jalen Waddle is being valued.
With this top 7 tier out of the way, that like I said, we feel that this is where the top talent cutoff happens at this point in our analysis. At this point, when we get to, this could change. We saw it extend a little bit last year with the rise of Anthony Richardson over time. Get a little bigger, might get a little deeper this year. Who knows? I don't see it falling off at all. But who knows? We'll talk about the 108. Nate, this is going your way.
Yeah.
What do you think at the 108? At the
108?
108. I might actually leave that in the video. Nate, what are you looking to do at the 108 in your rookie draft if you're looking to trade out? What are you looking to get?
Yeah, I think, with the board opening up at this point, we can take advantage of the fact that, yes, the board has opened up and the value at the top 7 is no longer there. But the 108, like the 101, gives you the choice. You don't have to worry about who's falling to you at the 110, the 111. You get to have your pick of the board with all of these next tier players. And what can we do to turn this first round pick, where we maybe don't want to reach into that pool and pick someone, we want to just soak up value. So we want to kind of move out of here. And Bob, you did put a note on here that we didn't want to trade down. I did kind of cheat here. I did break the rules, and I said, let's see if we can move back into the early second and pick up a 25 first, because I think that's really the move I want to make at this point. I had to break the rule because I feel so strongly about this is the move to make if you can at the 108. Yeah. Can you pick up an additional first next year? Because even if you're looking at that 25 first as a late first, do you know how many times that late first projected end up becoming mid first or even early first, and then it just gets better and better? If you look at every single future first as a late future first, then it's only going to go up from there, honestly. You can either only maintain or gain value if you're looking at first that way. So what can we do to take this pick and get 2 good assets out of it? I like going back to maybe the 202, the 203, picking up a 25 first. I would even be okay if we feel like it fits our timeline or we have good depth already. I wouldn't mind moving out of the 108 for a 25 first and a 26 first if I can make that happen. I'll pick up 2 firsts. People might be willing to move off some future draft capital if they can go get themselves their Brian Thomas Jr., their Troy Franklin, whoever that may be. If they can pick them up, I'll soak up the 2 firsts, sure.
Yeah, and that's a long way out too. We always talk about, I don't love personally making this move because I don't want to. I think that's an overpay, whatever the case is. But I know that once drafts are out, especially when teams feel really good about where their team is at, like you said, a team that is like, oh, it's going to be a late first. wheels fall off the bus faster than they don't. That's a saying, I
Mhm.
guess now. But it's one of those things you can't rule it in that your 25 first is going to be late, even if I've been meaning to work that in. I finally managed to. Just a fun little thing I came up with randomly. But either which way, getting back to it, love the concept. I love the idea of possibly getting 2 firsts. I don't know that it happens, but I love the idea of, we touched on this a lot last year too, with how the second quote unquote big tier shook out, towards the later half of the first round in rookie drafts, where we were in that wide receiver tier where it was kind of like, we had our reservations with Quentin Johnson, but we could realistically, like, value wise, put him in here. Not that we loved him there, but we had this year, and it's like, well, kind of the benefit to being at the top of it, like you said, is really only you get to pick your poison at the top of the tier. But I love the idea sliding back a few picks, and that's why tier based drafting is so important. We've talked about this in the past too, having that tier in place where you can feel comfortable sliding back 3 or 4 picks, whatever the case is, get some additional draft capital for the future, better your long-term roster, but still get similar valued players because you're playing off tiers that other people aren't. And
Yeah.
that's such a huge key of building long-term value in Dynasty, which is ultimately what we want to do with this concept. Moving on to my 109, and we've talked about it. We touched on it a little bit already. I have not addressed running back, but I think this is a good spot as any to do it. And I think, some teams right now are even in the position where I know in the comments over the course of when we've done rookie mock draft videos that, oh, no running back should be taken in the first round this year. And to a degree, I get it. But at the end of the day, I know in my heart of hearts that when draft time happens and teams are competitive teams are at the back end of first rounds, and they're like, man, I could really use a running back. Running backs are going to get drafted. I almost promise you it's going to happen. They're going to sneak into the tail end of the first round at worst.
I think a good way to look at this, Bob, to back up what you're talking about with how there's going to be first round running backs this year, is I would put the top of this class at a Zach Charbonnet level that we saw last year.
Interesting. Sure.
Okay. So about the same level of prospect. And we saw Zach Charbonnet in the late first last year because, like you said, contending teams want to get that running back, even if they go to and Zach Charbonnet went to the Seattle Seahawks where Kenneth Walker was. Didn't even have the straight line path to opportunity. But when it comes down to, hey, I need running backs because I did great last year, but I had Austin Eckler and Alvin Kamara, and now what am I looking at? I got a couple players I'm excited about, but no one for certain. I got to go pick up some more running back depth because we got to churn through these guys. So I think we are definitely going to see at least one, if not maybe 2 running backs in the first round once it really rolls around to our rookie drafts.
Yeah. And I think the thing too, even with that concept of piling on, there is still a deep rooted love in running backs in fantasy football in general. And that bleeds over into Dynasty, whether anybody likes to admit it or not, at least in my opinion. Every draft I've ever been in, running backs usually go earlier than they probably should. And maybe we're starting to see a turn of that to where it's more wide receiver values, especially in this draft where there is so much stinking wide receiver talent. Maybe we see some pushback on, running backs really squeaking out of first rounds.
I'm going to have to start drafting running backs, Bob.
Yeah, well, and that's what we're talking about. That's why we love the second round this year so much, is because you get running backs at the best value they've ever been. But either which way, I'm looking at teams that maybe want to flip their current running back. And I think one running back that teams are going to want to flip this year, and I know you want to flip this year, is Kyren Williams. And we look at the draft board, and there's probably not running backs in sight at this point, unless some get really juicy landing spots that, like you just mentioned, have that straight line to being a factor, a consistent utilization piece in a backfield. And that people are excited about. God knows Braylon Allen could go to the Cowboys at this point and nobody would even care about him. But whatever, let's put dream landing spots aside and talk about Kyren Williams as a guy who I want to go get. Somebody who, like I said, is, a lot of teams are going to be pivoting off of, if this is your designated pick that was on your team, you were in the playoffs last year, you almost got into the finals even, and you need a little pop to help you through the playoffs in 2024. I like Kyren Williams a good bit, and I think that there's as good a chance as any that they add a running back in the draft next year.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think anybody's coming for his job. And I got another running back that I'll talk about with my next pick. Spoiler alert. I don't think anybody's coming for his job. I think they'd be wise to add a running back so Kyron Williams isn't doing 80+% of the work, because I think that's the quick road to broken running backs in the NFL. And the thing is too is they're replaceable at the end of the day. But I think Kyron Williams is a talent and a good player. I can move for the 109. I know your thoughts here. You have another running back you'd rather go get with the 109. So feel free to touch on that. Feel free to touch on anybody else you want to target with this pick or other things you want to do with this pick.
Yeah, I think going for a running back here is a good idea. How can we use a late first to go pick up a running back in a draft class where maybe you don't really want to pick up any running backs in late first?
Yeah.
I like the idea of going after Kenneth Walker, who had an up and down season, still finishes RB19, and despite missing a couple games, despite having Zach Charbonnet there and taking over a larger role, despite having one of the worst schedules of any running back this year. You looked at Kenneth Walker's schedule on Sleeper at the beginning of the year and throughout the year, and it's just a bunch of orange and red. He played a lot of tough run defenses and still came out as a top 24 running back with some games missed. I think Kenneth Walker is just one of those underrated players because he's probably not going to give us the top 5 production at the running back position, but he's an undervalued RB1 in the current running back landscape where there's not a lot of top 12 running backs. And I think Kenneth Walker, yes, Zach Charbonnet is there. Yes, he's going to be part of the receiving work, but Kenneth Walker is going to continue to have his opportunities. And what's great with Kenneth Walker is his ability to create yards. He's one of the best creators of yards in the entire NFL. We saw it in college when he was at Michigan State. We've seen it over his first 2 years. He continues to lead the NFL in missed tackles forced and yards after contact. He is one of the greatest in the league right now at creating yards. And those are players I want to go after. I think he's a good value right now, a good buy low at the running back position. So Kenneth Walker is someone I would go maybe knock on some doors with the 109.
With that said, I'm looking at running backs in late first. I think, like you mentioned, this is a great time to shift some draft capital, turn into running backs, as opposed to, sometimes the best thing on the board is to go after is what's not available. Go after that in the league spectrum, because teams are willing to move extra or excess assets for positions they don't have. So if something's really strong on the board, like probably wide receivers at this point, they might want to go get a wide receiver over running back, especially with the, chatter or discussion about, wanting to pivot away from running backs almost as much as possible. A lot of teams looking to go 0 RB. I love Kyron Williams. I think he's a top 15, dynasty running back at this point for most people. But I still think he's on the outer end of the spectrum, even though he had a great year, because of people being concerned about this offense after Matthew Stafford leaves. There's always these, about Sean McVay retiring, all these, random rumors that people want to throw out there and concerns. And it's like, the thing is you look at any player, their situation can change dramatically and it's over. So it's like you start doing that with one. Okay, now do that with every single player you've ever rostered. You're just going to continuously turn things over. You need to have some conviction to stay on players or move off of them, I guess. But it can't just be playing scared all the time, because that's what that breeds. That mindset breeds of like, well, what's this offense going to be when Stafford retires? Probably trash. But in the meantime, it's going to be a great time. Kyron Williams is going to get you a lot of points. Kenneth Walker will too. What do you got at the 110?
At the 110, Bob, say you missed out on Brock Bowers. You need a tight end. It's a little too early to take JT Sanders. What can we do to go get ourselves a tight end with the 110? I would go target Dalton Kincaid. He had a pretty good rookie season, not quite as good as Sam Laporta, so he's a little undervalued, I think, still. Look, he's on Keep Trade Cut. I believe he's still a top 5, 6 tight end. He's right there with like Trey McBride. But Dalton Kincaid, if you're going and in your league, Dalton Kincaid's sitting on a team where they might have a Trey McBride or a Cole Kmet even, or an Evan Ingram or some kind of other tight end, I think Dalton Kincaid becomes a great target, because someone who already has a tight end that's also been productive, Dalton Kincaid, a young tight end with lots of potential, but maybe hasn't quite lived up to the lofty expectations we placed on him coming out of the first round. Now we have another first-round pick. Now, look, you picked up Dalton Kincaid probably around this spot last year, but we know how this goes. It's a year gone by. The 110 is sitting there. There's a wide receiver that someone really likes there. Maybe there's a fourth quarterback that somebody really likes at this point. And how can we use that to go get a tight end like Dalton Kincaid? I think if we also want to go after a guy like Trey McBride, a similar tight end, I think that's definitely the play here. If you need a tight end and you couldn't get Brock Bowers, how can you use that late first to go upgrade your tight end, get someone you can just put right into your starting lineup and give you production right away?
I love this. Love Dalton Kincaid as a talent. Love that, he's still trending towards being a top receiving asset in that offense, attached to Josh Allen for a long time. All about the concept of going and getting Dalton Kincaid on my team by just about any means necessary. And I think this is a good one. Maybe you have to add just a shred of value on top,
I think so.
but this is a good starting point to get a conversation started. I don't think anybody's looking at this trade and just like, nah, heck you. I think this at worst gets conversation started.
Yep.
And that's what you want to do, and maybe just reach out and say, hey, what are you looking to get for Dalton Kincaid? Are you even looking to move him? If they don't have another option, they might not be super entitled to. Maybe they just drafted Brock Bowers. Who knows? Whoever drafts
Yeah.
Brock Bowers, go and knock on the doors and see what they got in their tight end room kicking around, because they had their excess depth at this point for them and their mindset. So with that said, moving on to my 111, my last specifically dedicated pick. And one thing that I want to add to this is kind of a bonus, since I'm doubling up on running back and it feels cheap, I guess. But now is the time that I'm willing to kind of re-roll on pick location in 2025. What that means is I'm willing to move this 111 for a 25 first, and anything I get on top is great. If I get a 25 third or 26 third back for my quote unquote trouble, too many quote unquotes, of moving back a full calendar year and then getting a future pick on top of that as well, more than happy to do it. Like you said before, a lot of teams will assume that their pick is going to be better than it is next year. And maybe that's for better or worse, but a lot of teams will be like, man, I won this year. I was in the playoffs this year. I was in the championship game this year, just didn't make it. This one piece that I'm adding is going to do it all for me and push me over the top. Boulevard of broken dreams right there, my friend, you're setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment and failure. But with that said, that's something I'm willing to do with this pick, starting with this pick at the 112, especially willing to do that as well. But I'm looking to add Rachaad White here, and somebody who I still also don't believe is really being valued as a top running back talent. And I think this goes right into the Kenneth Walker discussion, is a guy who's performing as a running back one, is probably, even in this landscape, still a back end running back one on a bad week, has receiving upside, and another guy who thrived in a workhorse role this year with a top running back finish. And I think he's another guy. They add some running back depth in the draft, and I kind of hope they do, to give somebody else some work in this offense, but nobody's coming for his job. Rachaad White is safe. He's a good enough player. He's safe. Even if they take some away, in this day and age with running backs, I don't want my running back getting 90% of the work anymore, because they're going to get beat to heck and they're going to be off the field more often than they're on it. And that's, with running backs, are already kind of scarce to find producers as it is. I mean, we talk about the zero running back approach and, being able to go buy guys for kind of cheap. But I'd rather buy a guy who I think could be in an offense regularly, consistently putting up points, and not sweat if they add somebody that they're just going to work them in as a rotational piece versus a guy coming for a job. Now, if they go draft somebody in the first round, that's probably a different discussion. Day two, you have to have some discussions of what that kind of player is, what that offense wants to look like next year. But if it's day three guy, even round four, not super sweating, and I'm not really sweating anyway. We've seen Rachaad White really pop off this year and look really good. So that's what I'm looking to do overall with this pick. Nate, feel free to dive in or wrap this up with your 112, whatever you got here.
Yeah, I want to go ahead and wrap it up as we talk about kind of our pick here, Bob, because we kind of came to this one together. With the 112, we were like, what is the good value here? And we settled on talking about George Pickens.
Who we hate.
Who we hate. Yeah, this is a player that I have not been a huge fan of his value for much of this season and the last offseason. But look, George Pickens put together a 1,000-yard season this year with a really bad quarterback situation. Deontay Johnson did miss some times. I've come around to the point where I used to think that Deontay Johnson was the bona fide wide receiver one there, and I still think he will see more targets than George Pickens. But I think at this point, it has become a pretty 1A, 1B situation. And they're going to be used in their different ways. Deontay is probably going to lead in targets and receptions. But I think at this point, Pickens is going to probably lead in yards, and probably because of his size, lead in touchdowns, and also Deontay's allergy to touchdowns that we saw in 2022. So I don't know what the quarterback situation looks like. It sounds like Kenny Pickett's going to be there next year, but there's probably going to be a competition. We'll see if maybe they bring in a veteran that can take advantage of this offense, because I think there's good pieces in this offense. They just need a solid quarterback. They need a stronger offensive line. And I think George Pickens, with his youth, with his upside that he's already shown 2 years into his career, he's not my favorite pickup. But with the 112, I think there is some value in getting George Pickens, because at this point we're starting to get into like kind of third, fourth tier of wide receivers.
Yeah.
And I can just go out there and get George Pickens, who I've already seen put up 1,000 yards. I've already seen kind of outproduce a bad situation. And like I said, I love players that can create yards. George Pickens showed that he can create a lot of his own yards this year. So,
yeah, I like this pick a lot. Like you said, we came to this decision kind of as a unit. And I think the one thing that really pushed it over for me was based on how we think that top 7 is going to shake out. And you touched on this too, how we think that top 7 is going to shake out. And then how we think this wide receiver room is going to continue. There's still good wide receivers on the board right now, but I like the idea of kicking over to one who's still relatively young, produced this year, has shown glimpses and flashes over the course of time. Maybe you have to add a little on top, but I think this value shakes out pretty fairly. And as always, when you get into rookie drafts, rookie FOMO kicks in, rookie picks inflate. They're going to continue to inflate. Maybe the only question with this going long-term, looking ahead a couple of months, we have free agency in the meantime. They might bring in, God knows, maybe they bring in someone like Kirk Cousins. That would be an interesting addition, and I think inflate his value pretty quickly. But if they don't do anything in free agency, they're looking at the draft. Who knows what they're looking at that point? That's always a concern. They're kind of a mid-round pick. So quarterback isn't super on the board at that point, but could be in the second round. And there's some decent enough quarterbacks in this draft that could make it interesting, I think. So, but I like this pick. I like George Pickens over the wide receivers you're probably drafting in that range, especially with, like I said, cooking in the league for 2 years already.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge benefit.
And a young prospect too. I believe he was like 21 coming out.
I think he'll be 24 coming into this year, or sometime next year he'll be 24. So yes, definitely still a young prospect. He's younger than some of the prospects in this class, which is still mind-boggling to me.
I like the George Pickens value here, but I think my favorite move to make if I'm going for a wide receiver with the 112 is, what do I have to add on to the 112 to go acquire a underperforming or similar valued rookie from the 2023 class? And what I mean by that is, how much do I have to add to go get Jaden Reed, to go get JSN?
Okay. Oh, you got me with that one. I love the idea of going to get JSN, because I think people hate him right now.
Exactly. And what I don't think I need to add much to the 112 to get JSN. At least not as much as I should have to add.
Yeah. And I think especially, if you're making this move in draft, you might not have to add a dang thing depending on who you're talking to. I think you should probably have to add a second in 25 to get that done at least. But people hate JSN right now. It's fact of the matter is, he was terrible, even though he really wasn't. Also playing behind 2 bona fide stud wide receivers already in a Geno Smith-led offense that was clearly not as good as it was the previous season. A lot of things didn't go great for JSN. Having that hand fracture, broken hand, whatever it was, leading into the season, that took away a lot of his preseason lead up and probably slowed him for the first few games of the season. Was not expected to play in the first few weeks of the season after the injury happened. So, a guy I love the concept of buying in on, and with the wide receivers that are on the board, unless you're a diehard like me, I think a lot of people are interested in that. If they haven't been able to offload JSN yet, I think depending on how this class shakes out, love that concept. I love having to add a little bit to go get JSN, and that's because I love JSN. That's not saying I don't like George Pickens that much. I love JSN. I want to get him everywhere if I don't have him, and I think there's a nice little buy window on him right now where you can get him at a reasonable price. And Jaden Reed, I think you can almost get for the 112 as is.
Exactly.
His value's, a little in limbo. It's definitely trending up, even though we were recording this before the divisional game, but in the wild card week, he had 0 catches, still trending up somehow. But love the player, love the concept. And I like all that we've done with these picks today. But with that said, that is going to wrap it up for us today. Let us know what you're looking to do with your rookie picks as we get closer. Are you holding on tight, or are you looking to make some of these moves? Are you looking to bring some other moves to the table? We want to know in the comments below, and we definitely want to talk about it in further detail in our Patreon Discord, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get over there, get in on that 7-day free trial. With all that said, all the promo in the books, we are going to see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.